Raindrops on glass. The Bangalore Chennai Express lurched forward as Rohan Sharma settled into his window seat, watching raindrops race down the glass. Each droplet mirrored his mood, sliding inexorably along a predetermined path until vanishing at the bottom edge. At 34, he'd become one of the youngest senior architects at Sterling Designs, but the achievement felt hollow. Tonight's journey to present designs for another soulless corporate tower in Chennai seemed like just another step on an endless treadmill. Rohan adjusted his navy blue blazer and opened his laptop. The 3D renderings of glass and steel structures blurred before his tired eyes. 7 years of creating spaces that impressed clients but never touched the heart. The idealistic architecture student who once dreamed of building communities was disappearing, replaced by a man who built monuments to commerce. "Excuse me, is anyone sitting here?" A melodic voice interrupted his thoughts. Rohan looked up to see a woman in her late 20s gesturing to the seat beside him. She wore a simple kurta in deep purple with silver earrings shaped like musical notes. Her hair was tied in a loose bun with a few strands framing her face, and she carried an instrument case that looked like a smaller version of a sitar.
"No."
"Please," he said, quickly moving his bag. "Thank you." She settled in, placing the instrument carefully between her feet. "I'm Priya Nair, Rohan," he replied simply, expecting the conversation to end there as he turned back to his screen. The train picked up speed, cutting through the monsoon evening. Lightning occasionally illuminated the landscape, revealing misty hills and glistening fields. Rohan tried to focus on his presentation but found his attention drifting to his seatmate, who was writing in a worn leather journal with musical notations. A sudden jolt sent the train lurching. Rohan's coffee cup tipped, sending a brown stream toward his laptop. Priya reacted instantly, using her scarf to catch most of the spill before it reached his computer. "Quick reflexes," Rohan said, grateful and surprised. "Musicians need good timing," she replied with a smile that reached her eyes. "Your designs are safe. Are they worth saving?" The words slipped out before he could stop them. Priya tilted her head, studying him with unexpected intensity. "That's an interesting question from someone who creates buildings." "Sorry, ignore me. Just tired." Rohan attempted to retreat back into professional politeness. "I don't think I will," she said, closing her journal. "What brings you to work presentation? Another office tower that will look exactly like the last 10 I've designed." He hadn't meant to be so transparent with a stranger. "And you'd rather be designing something else?" she asked. The simple question pierced through years of professional deflection. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the window like a gentle prompt for honesty. "I'd rather be designing something that matters," he admitted quietly. Priya nodded as if she understood completely. "I'm heading to Chennai for a fusion concert. I compose and play the modified sitar. This is a travel version," she explained, patting the case. "But I used to play only classical music for years because my guru insisted it was the purest form. It took me a long time to realize I could honor tradition while still creating something new." Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the compartment. In that flash, Rohan noticed details he'd missed: calluses on her fingers from string instruments, a small tattoo of a bird in flight on her wrist, and eyes that seemed to see beyond surfaces. "Does your music matter?" he asked. "To me it does. To some who listen, perhaps. Isn't that enough?" She removed her instrument from its case. "May I?" When Rohan nodded, Priya positioned the small sitar in her lap and began to play softly, her fingers dancing across the strings. The melody seemed to weave together with the rhythm of the train and the pattern of rain, creating something both ancient and new. As the notes filled their small shared space, Rohan closed his laptop. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, like a door long closed had been nudged slightly open, letting in a draft of possibility. "What's the name of that piece?" he asked when she finished. Priya smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "It doesn't have one yet. Maybe by the time we reach Chennai it will." The train rushed through the darkness, carrying them toward a destination neither could fully predict. Pages between strangers. The rain eased as night settled fully over the countryside, and the rhythmic clacking of the train created a soothing backdrop. Rohan found himself in the unfamiliar territory of genuine conversation with Priya, his presentation forgotten on his closed laptop. "So you're building another glass tower," Priya said, carefully returning her instrument to its case. "But what would you build if you had complete freedom? If there were no clients or budgets or corporate expectations?" The question caught Rohan off. It had been years since anyone had asked him about his dreams rather than his deliverables. "There's a coastal village near Pondicherry," he began hesitantly. "After the tsunami years ago, they rebuilt with whatever they could find. I visited once for a vacation and ended up sketching designs for sustainable community spaces that would withstand future disasters while preserving their way of life." He paused, surprised at himself. "I still have those sketches somewhere, probably gathering dust in my apartment. Why didn't you pursue it?" Priya asked, her voice free of judgment. Rohan gazed out at the passing darkness. Practicality, security, the usual suspects that kill dreams. He turned back to her. "What about you? Was breaking from classical tradition difficult?" Priya's fingers absently traced the outline of her instrument case. My father was furious. He studied under Pandit Ravi Shankar briefly and believed classical traditions were sacred. When I started experimenting with fusion, incorporating elements of jazz and electronic music, she smiled ruefully. Let's just say there were many silent dinners, but you did it anyway. I had to. Music isn't just notes on a page, it's alive. It evolves. Her eyes met his. Like buildings shouldn't just be lines on blueprints. They're living spaces, aren't they? The train slowed unexpectedly, the brakes whining as they pulled into a small, unscheduled station. An announcement crackled through the speakers due to waterlogging on the tracks ahead. They would stop here for 30 minutes. Shall we stretch our legs? Priya suggested, already standing. Outside, the platform was nearly deserted except for a few vendors selling chai and snacks under flickering lights. The air smelled of wet earth, spices, and possibility. They walked side by side, steam rising from their paper cups of masala chai. Look, Priya pointed to where the station roof had partially collapsed, revealing the star-filled sky between breaks in the clouds. Sometimes broken things reveal beauty you'd never see otherwise. Rohan studied the improvised wooden supports local craftsmen had installed to stabilize the remaining structure. There's genius in this necessity, he observed. No architect would design this way, but it works and it has character. They found themselves at the end of the platform, looking out over fields washed silver by moonlight breaking through the clouds. The world seemed suspended between moments, between lives. I carry this everywhere, Priya said suddenly, pulling a leather-bound journal from her bag. It's where I keep fragments, ideas, melodies, observations, things that might become something someday. She handed it to him, a gesture of unexpected trust. Rohan carefully opened it to find pages filled with musical notations, interspersed with watercolor sketches and handwritten thoughts. Some pages contained pressed flowers or ticket stubs from concerts. This is beautiful, he said, meaning it. A physical memory of your creative journey. Do you keep anything like this? Rohan shook his head. My creativity goes into client-approved formats, presentations, renderings, material specifications. Maybe that's the problem, Priya suggested gently. She took the journal back and flipped to an empty page. Here, design something just for you. Something no client will ever see. She offered him her pen. Rohan hesitated, then took it, feeling strangely vulnerable. He hadn't sketched freely since university. After a moment, his hand began to move across the page, outlining a structure integrated with nature, walls that breathed with the environment, spaces designed for community rather than commerce. Priya watched silently as he filled the page, with increasingly confident lines. When he finished, he looked up to find her smiling. That, she said simply, is an architect who hasn't disappeared completely. The station master's whistle called them back to the train. As they settled into their seats, something had shifted between them, a recognition of kindred spirits, fighting similar battles against different constraints. What happens to your music after the concert? Rohan asked as the train began moving again. I'm recording an album next month, taking a real chance on my fusion style. She looked both excited and terrified. My father still doesn't approve, but I've stopped waiting for permission to create what feels true. That takes courage. Or desperation, she laughed softly. There's a point where the pain of not being authentic becomes greater than the fear of disapproval. Rohan felt those words resonate through him like a tuning fork struck against stone. He thought about the corporate tower waiting in about the years stretching ahead filled with similar projects, about the sketches gathering dust in his apartment. We're all trapped in something, he said. Jobs, expectations, routines. True, Priya nodded, but I've found that traps often have doors we simply haven't noticed. As the train accelerated through the night, Rohan found himself studying her, this stranger who created without permission, who carried her art in a case at her feet and her inspirations bound in leather. Her presence made his carefully constructed professional identity feel like a costume he'd worn too long. Would you play something else? He asked. Something you've never performed for anyone. Priya hesitated, then nodded. As she positioned her instrument, their eyes met briefly in silent understanding. They were still strangers technically, but something about the liminal space of this journey, suspended between cities and lives, had created a peculiar intimacy. The melody she played this time was haunting, incomplete, searching, like a question without an answer. Outside, the rain began again, soft and persistent against the window glass. Asterisk, vanishing notes Steni. Central Station loomed ahead as dawn broke through dissipating clouds. The overnight journey was coming to an end, and Rohan felt an unexpected reluctance as the train slowed. Their conversation had meandered through the night, punctuated by comfortable silences and Priya's occasional impromptu melodies. This is where we part ways, Priya said, gathering her belongings as the train pulled into the station. The morning light caught in her hair, creating a momentary halo effect that seemed oddly appropriate. Your concert, when is it? Rohan asked, suddenly aware he hadn't inquired about specifics. Tonight at Kalakshetra Arts Festival, though I doubt corporate architecture presentations leave much room for musical detours. Her smile was warm but tinged with something like regret. The train jerked to a halt. Around them, passengers began retrieving luggage and filing toward the exits. The brief sanctuary of their shared journey was dissolving into the chaos of arrival. It was nice meeting you, Rohan. I hope you find what you're looking for, even if it's not in Glass Towers. She hesitated, then impulsively tore a page from her journal and pressed it into his hand. Something to remember our conversation by. Before he could respond, she was gone, slipping into the crowd with her instrument case. A splash of purple curtain quickly lost among the sea of morning commuters. Rohan looked down at the folded paper in his palm. It contained the musical notation she had played during the night, the haunting, unfinished melody with a simple note. Some compositions find their endings in unexpected places. He searched the platform, but she had vanished completely. Only then did he realize she had left behind her journal, tucked between the seat and window. He grabbed it instinctively and hurried off the train, scanning the crowded platform, but Priya was nowhere to be found. With a resigned sigh, Rohan headed to his hotel. The corporate presentation loomed at noon, but his mind kept returning to fragments of conversation and music from the night before. Echoes of change 3 months later. Rohan stood in his empty office, a cardboard box containing his personal effects in his arms. His resignation had shocked Sterling Designs, particularly after his Chennai presentation had secured their biggest contract of the year. "You're walking away from partnership track," his director had said incredulously. "For what? Some pipe dream about sustainable community projects." Perhaps it was madness, but after returning from Chennai, Rohan had found himself unable to continue. He had spent evenings poring over Priya's journal, filled with her thoughts on authenticity and courage, interspersed with musical compositions. He had searched for information about her concert, about any musician named Priya Nair, but found only scattered references to a rising fusion artist, who kept a low profile. The journal had become both inspiration and catalyst. 2 weeks after his return, he had pulled out his old sketches of the Coastal Village project and begun refining them. A month later, he had contacted several NGOs focused on sustainable development. Now, he was leaving the security of his career for an uncertain path with an organization called Reimagine Spaces, which worked with communities affected by natural disasters. As he left the Sterling offices for the final time, rain began falling, a gentle reminder of that night on the train. He wondered where Priya was now, if her album recording had gone well, if she ever missed her journal. He had kept it safe, hoping someday to return it. His first assignment with Reimagine took him to the very coastal region he had sketched years ago. Working directly with fishermen and local craftspeople, Rohan found the fulfillment that had eluded him for years. His designs incorporated indigenous knowledge with modern engineering, creating structures that belonged to their environment rather than imposing upon it. 6 months into his new life, he was invited to a fundraising event in Bangalore for arts and community development. The invitation mentioned a special musical performance, but gave no details about the performer. Rohan almost declined such events, reminded him too much of the corporate functions he'd left behind, but something urged him to attend, perhaps the same instinct that had led him to speak honestly with a stranger on a rain-soaked train. The venue was an old colonial building repurposed as an arts center. As Rohan mingled awkwardly among donors and organizers, the lights dimmed for the performance. A single spotlight illuminated the stage where a familiar instrument waited. And then she appeared. The symphony continues. Priya looked different, her hair cut shorter, her presence somehow more confident, but the moment her fingers touched the strings of her instrument, Rohan knew with certainty. The melody that filled the room was the same unfinished piece from the train, but now complete, evolved into something whole and resonant. When the performance ended and applause faded, Rohan waited by the side exit, the worn leather journal in his hands. After several minutes, the door opened, and Priya emerged, instrument case slung over her shoulder. She stopped abruptly when she saw him. "You found an ending," he said simply, gesturing toward the stage she had just left. Recognition dawned in her eyes. "Rohan, the architect from the train." He nodded, holding out her journal. "You left this behind." "I've been hoping to return it." She took it reverently, running her fingers over the worn cover. "I thought it was lost forever. I've been working from memory these past months." Her eyes met his. "You kept it all this time." "It helped me find my way," he admitted. "I left Sterling Designs. I'm working on sustainable community architecture now, those projects I told you about." A slow smile spread across her face. "So you found your door out of the trap." "More like you showed me it was there all along." He hesitated. "Your album, did it happen?" "Released last month. It's called Strangers on Trains." She laughed at his expression. "That night changed things for me too. After meeting someone who was willing to question everything they'd built, I found the courage to fully commit to my fusion work. My father even came to a performance last week." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the journal between them like a bridge connecting their separate journeys. "I should thank you properly," Priya said finally. "There's a cafe around the corner. I'd love to hear about your community projects." "And I'd love to hear the complete composition," Rohan replied. As they walked together into the evening, neither mentioned the strange coincidence that had brought them to the same event in a city neither of them had been living in when they met. Perhaps some connections, once formed, create their own gravity, pulling lives back into alignment after they've spun apart. Over coffee, they'd shared the paths they'd taken since that rainy night, how a brief encounter had somehow granted each of them permission to pursue long-deferred dreams, how they had carried the memory of a stranger's words when courage faltered. "Do you believe in fate now?" Priya asked, echoing their midnight philosophical debate on the train. Rohan considered the question seriously. "I believe in catalysts," he said finally. "Sometimes we need someone outside our usual life to help us see what's possible." "Well, whatever you call it," she said, raising her cup in a small toast. "I'm glad it brought us to that same train, and here again." Outside, rain began to fall once more, pattering against the cafe windows, but unlike the raindrops that had once symbolized Rohan's trapped existence, these seemed to carry a different message of renewal, of cycles completing and beginning again, of journeys continuing. "I've been invited to design cultural spaces in Pondicherry next month," Rohan said casually. "They want to incorporate performance areas for local musicians." "Interesting," Priya replied with equal casualness. "I'm planning a coastal tour of South India around the same time, testing new material." Their eyes met in shared understanding. This ending was really another beginning, one they would approach with the same authenticity they had found on a chance encounter months ago. Some compositions, after all, find their true form in unexpected places. The rain continued outside, but neither was in any hurry to leave.